Well, thank you. That was a very flattering introduction, I must say. Hopefully the work will stand up to that. But this is kind of the first serious body of work I did after graduating from my MFA. It was called Garden of Delights. And they were made from, most of them were made from clay, modeled in clay and then cast in concrete. A lot of them had a water element to it. Carved wood, things I didn't need elaborate tools for. They were kind of easy to make, and small scale too, because I was working in small space. So as the title suggests, they were kind of inspired by the little monsters in Hieronymus Bosch's paintings. They're very visceral. The water referenced bodily fluids and all these kind of grotesque things in a way, kind of rude, visceral events. Like you can see that kind of wooden thing looks kind of like a nipple with a tail. That was my mermaid. And it's spraying a jet of water that kind of goes into this kind of unicorn skull eye. Because I had been making objects at York, I was interested in kind of expanding into installation. But still coming from an object base. So at this time in my career, after I graduated in Toronto, there wasn't anywhere to show sculpture. And so a bunch of my peers and I decided we were going to set up our own shows. And so we founded the collective Nethermind. It started off with about six artists who had just graduated from York. And then we invited a couple of senior artists, Tom Dean and Reinhard Reitzenstein, and a couple of artists from OCAD. And we kind of sort out cheap kind of warehouse spaces for a 1 month show. And at the time, it was in recession, so there was a lot of empty space in Toronto. And we kind of get, for $1,000, we could get 4,000 square feet for the month. But we always ended up in the basements of these kind of big cavernous warehouses, which actually worked out really well. They were kind of dark, kind of a bit spooky spaces, and often there were lots of different chambers and rooms, so the viewers had to come in and kind of explore and come across the artworks in these kind of very atmospheric sites. So this ended up being a lot more satisfying to me, more satisfying than showing in a gallery space, because and it was better for the viewer, too, because they were actually exploring and investigating the space. It became more of a participatory kind of experience. These are two pieces from the Garden of Delight series. One's the chain brain. It's just made by wrapping chain and wiring it together. So really low-tech kind of processes that didn't require any kind of technical tools or anything. The other piece was kind of nicknamed Jet. It was just kind of like this kind of weird amorphous kind of duck-billed kind of bird skull, and it just shot jets of water straight down into the bowl. So they made sounds like gurgling sounds. One piece was like a big hippopotamus head kind of yawning with bubbles kind of bubbling away. I'd started working with water at York, and I found that it added an element to the work. So they weren't just static objects. They kind of came to life. Also, I found that water really drew people in. People were physically drawn to it because it makes sounds, it moves, it reflects light, and it just often it can have a calming effect. And sometimes, it can be really irritating. If it's the right kind of sound, it kind of makes you want to go to the bathroom and kind of physiologically affects you. This was the third Nethermind show. Nethermind, we kept growing and ended up inviting 3 more artists. We ended up having 4 shows within about 3 years. So it was busy. We'd have regular meetings, and we'd go out and find spaces and negotiate with landlords. We'd apply for grants. And then we'd have to make the work on top of that. Insurance we had to get insurance, all those things. And then because we're not being organized by a gallery or organization, we had to do all the invites and posters and everything. So it was actually a really great learning experience. And then we'd have to light the shows as well, and there was no power, very few power outlets, so we'd have to run cables. So it ended up being a huge kind of project. But because of it, it really got us known in Toronto. And we're just fresh out of school, and there were very few galleries in Toronto at that time. They were not interested in sculptures, more photo textural work. So to show sculpture, it was very, very difficult. So this kind of opened up a way of showing work that wasn't actually being seen at the time. And it provoked a whole, there had been other collectives. I can't take full credit for, Nethermind wasn't fully responsible, but it kind of set up a model for other younger artists who were just coming out of school and needed places to show. This was a third Nethermind, and this was, each time our space kind of got bigger and more cavernous. And this one was a great space. It ended up being kind of 3 chambers, one huge chamber, and then it opened up in a freight elevator area where these fabric balls are hanging. And then it got darker and colder as you went back into the space. This was a series of works I did called Strange Fruit, and they're bags just sewn out of canvas, rubber latex on the inside and filled with water. They're very kind of abstracted forms, but they really do speak of the body of like flesh. It's kind of like flesh reduced down to its basic essence. You'd hit them and they kind of have a lot of resistance, like hitting the back end of a horse. And they had a strong smell. The rubber latex mixing with the canvas gave it kind of an animal smell. So they had this really strong physical presence. I was invited to do another show by another smaller kind of curatorial collective who they called 23rd Room, and they do a show every 2 years at this kind of old derelict hotel called the Duke of Connaught, and they called it the Documenta because it was a biennial. And they'd invite different artists to come and show in each of these little sad little hotel rooms. There'd been a fire at one point, so they were no longer allowed to rent them out as rooms, but the bar was still running downstairs, so you'd hear the noises coming up from the bar. And it was kind of a lot of down and outers in the bar, and the smell of cigarette smoke. It was kind of seedy. It was very seedy. And while it was running, the rooms would be rented out for short term, so all that kind of flavor came through in these kind of sad little rooms. So what I wanted to do was something very subtle and just kind of take advantage of the atmosphere of the room. So on the left-hand side, you see a little thing on the wall. Like you'd walk in, and it would just look like an empty room. And then you'd notice this thing in the wall and approach it. And it would be this eye. And then you'd notice that there would be a tear would well up in the eye and just kind of roll down the wall. And it was kind of nice because of the fire, there was kind of soot all over everything. So the tear would kind of wash away the dirt. It was like tears coming down like a little kid's face. So in this piece, it was I found it an important work because it required very little I didn't have to do very much to kind of activate the whole space. So I thought that was a kind of a successful installation work. I've shown this piece many times in gallery spaces since then, but it's never been quite as powerful or as effective as it was in that hotel room. This was the last Nethermind, a piece from the last Nethermind show, which was 1995. And again, the space was even bigger, 6,000 square feet this time. I was showing in this kind of long, tall, dark room. And when you look in, this is what you'd see. This was chasing white Christmas lights that would kind of spin and rotate like a galaxy. And so you'd be looking in the space and you'd see it, and it's actually reflected in 2 layers of glass at the back of the room. And so it appears to be like being projected beyond the walls of the room because it's a reflection. And it's actually in a back room, and then the viewer would stand in this room in front, and then I'd have 6 speakers around the top of the room, and then it kind of preventing you from stepping over into the next room. I didn't want you to see the light box that was providing the source of that reflection. So I kind of tried to obstruct that opening. I mean, you could step over and go in there if you were really keen, but I was trying to prevent that. In the box, there's a swirling vortex of water going into a hole. And it's kind of spinning in the same direction as the galaxy. This piece was called Vertigo, and out of each of the speakers was my voice counting backwards from 100 down through 0 to negative 100. So each number would come out of a different speaker, so it was also spinning. So it was kind of a very kind of mesmerizing, kind of calming piece. You'd kind of almost feel like you're being hypnotized. And for me, it was kind of about the water became to represent kind of this natural force, associated with nature, with the hidden structures of the universe. It's like the vortex in the water is very much like the spinning of the gallery. The vortex became like, the black hole that we think is at the center of all the galaxies and kind of sucking in matter and light. And the numbers, the counting down is like kind of almost going through zero, which is like the vortex into kind of the subconscious, into the negative numbers. That's how I kind of thought of it. It was done in a very kind of intuitive way. The piece evolved. I started off with the light box and then added the vortex, but that became too much of just a binary kind of relationship. It was kind of too closed, so I wanted to add a third element. And the third element came to me one night when I was having trouble sleeping. I'd count backwards in my head from 100 down through 0. And it seemed as you're going through 0, it's like you start to go into the subconscious and you start feeling a bit sleepy, and then then you fall asleep. So one of the nice things about the Nethermind spaces where they're very rough and raw, and they had this very strong atmosphere. So we wanted to kind of keep a lot of that atmosphere. We didn't want to clean it up too much. We didn't want to gallery-ify it. So we had debates whether you even sweep the floors in there. We wanted to keep the dirt. In my space, it was kind of nice. There was an old motor, an old engine that was just sitting there, kind of rusting away, and there was a dead pigeon. So I left all that stuff. It kind of just added to what the piece was kind of speaking about. About I guess the winding down of time. I was kind of thinking of that at the end of things. And so it's kind of a metaphysical kind of piece, as about as metaphysical as I get. John Bentley Mays actually did a review of that show, and he said, I don't know what this means, but it seems like it means something important. I kind of like to make work that you're not sure exactly what it means, but it looks like it's saying something. It's like open-ended. That's what I want. I leave room for the viewer. In 1996, I was invited to be part of a show in Denmark. It was called Container 96. That year, Copenhagen was the cultural capital of Europe. And so they had tons of money to organize all these art events. So I was invited as one of 5 Canadian artists who was invited by Louis Dompierre from the power plant to represent Canada. What they did was they set up all these containers on the pier in Copenhagen, and they kind of set it up in the configuration of the globe. So the artists from wherever you were in the globe, you go and inhabit, set up installations inside the containers and in your zone. I think I was invited at the last minute. Someone dropped out, so I was kind of a second stringer, but that's okay. So when the curator talked to me on the phone, I was in the process of making crates, and I was kind of, what could I put to go into a container? And I kind of looked down at what I was doing, and I go, oh, crates would be perfect. And so what I did was I designed these crates with thin as panels on the side as possible, made rubber liners to go in them. And once I got there, I pumped seawater, which was 50 yards away. I pumped them into the crates and then put the lids back on, so they bulged from the weight of the water. And they kind of create a little passageway in between them. And so the viewer, you could go in and kind of walk in amongst the crates. I was a bit disappointed when I got there, because when we were looking at the crates in Toronto, they were looking at examples of what we were going to be showing in. They were just raw, rusty old crates. And they're nice and dark inside. And then we get there, and they've painted them all and sanded the floors and cleaned them up. So that was a bit of a drag, but what can you do? They needed lights. Seeing as it was so gray, it was all cleaned up, I put lights in, but I kind of hung them in a kind of more utilitarian way, so they just bare bulbs. It was kind of funny, visitors to the exhibition, they'd approach my container, and they'd think I was still installing. Like, they were very perplexed. They didn't really know what was going on. The more adventurous people would walk in, and then they'd start to sense the bulge and the sense the physicality of these things. There was, I forget how many pounds of water, or how many kilograms. It was like 3,000 kilograms or something once they were all filled up. The biggest one was like 2 meters long, 2/3 of a meter wide, and 2 meters high. So it was a big mass of water. When I was filling them, the bottom of the container buckled, and it made this huge boom. They stacked the containers, or they put me on the ground level because they didn't want me leaking on anyone. So I didn't want you to see the water, because I was talking about open-endedness. I didn't want you to see that it was filled with water. Like, you know it is, but it also kind of opens up the metaphor. It's about trying to contain something that is potentially is dangerous to contain. You know, it's like trying to contain the ocean or control nature. It was these themes that started to come out of working with the water, and my struggle of working with the water too, trying to contain it and control it. And at some point, I always had to kind of step back and let the water just do its thing, and that kind of completed the work. So often, you know, it was kind of like getting a beginning of an idea and then following it through and then letting the water kind of complete the idea, and it completed it conceptually as well. So this became kind of a theme that runs through all my work, is this kind of culture versus nature, and this kind of balance, or this kind of conflict or tension that's happening between the two things, which seems very relevant right now with all the issues we have with the environment and with climate change and things like AIDS, everything, pollution. While I was in Copenhagen, it's in the harbor, and there's all these big ships coming in, like these huge container ships, and this big train ferry from Sweden would come in, and a whole train would come off the ship. It was like pretty incredible. So I had already started thinking about this body of work, but that kind of just confirmed my desire to continue with it. This was called a series of ships and bottles called 10 Small Nautical Disasters. And actually the idea came to me like flying across the Great Lakes coming back from San Francisco, and it was kind of dusk, and you're looking down, and the Great Lakes are very small, and there's a tiny little lake freighter kind of moving across, and there was ice flows. Everything looked so clean and perfect, but there's like stuff being spewed out and people swearing down. There's all this kind of dirt and reality as you get closer, but from a distance you didn't see any of that. So I decided I wanted to kind of do these kind of sea nautical scenes, and the first one I just did a little boat floating in a bottle I put real water and real sand, and I let it sit there for a while. Like, the first thing I noticed was that the boat it doesn't stay in the middle. It like follows the meniscus and gets stuck on the glass. So each step I had, this technical thing I had to overcome. So I overcame that by putting a magnet in the shelf and then a small magnet in the boat. And so it always keeps it in the middle and always aligned the same way as well. So it kind of sets a composition up for you. The next thing I noticed was the glass would fog up, so it would be really hard to see the boat inside. So that was another problem. I kind of overcame that with this oil spill piece here. I injected, I'm going to backtrack because I'm getting ahead of myself. The other thing I noticed, I used tap water, and there's algae in tap water. It's never completely clean. So after a few days, algae started to grow in there. It was like a whole ecology was a little closed ecosystem. And then mold started. I just coated the cork boats. I carved them out of cork in silicone, and then mold started growing on the ship. So that started, it's like a plague ship. It's like got a disease on it. So that's what suggested the whole idea of these disasters. And what I liked about that is it totally undermines the whole kind of romantic, kind of naive idea of the ship in the bottle. They're always like, have this very strong nostalgic feeling. Like it's these done by sailors who are no longer at sea, kind of reliving their memories by making these little ships. So it undercut that, which I liked, and gave it a dark humor. So the boats, each bottle was kind of based on a different type of subject. Some of them were historical. This is the Titanic. And of course, the real Titanic broke in half, but that doesn't look so good as the whole Titanic. And this one I used the tap water. So stuff starts growing. It's been growing on the ship, mold and algae, and so it's kind of existing in real time, like the real Titanic is. It's been in that bottle. This was 1996. I made this, so it's been in that bottle for 15 years now. The Agnes Etherington in Kingston owns this piece. So again, it's the whole little ecosystem in there. This was just oil spill. Some of them were just based on kind of just an event. It was a generalized event. There's tons of oil spills all the time, so it was just an oil spill. It wasn't based on a particular incident. So as I said, I injected in black motor oil, and so each time I show this, I have to kind of reset it up each time, clean out the bottle at the end, and I try and separate the oil, and so it's not going down the sink drain. I get it from my mechanic. This was another historical event. This was the Franklin expedition. And this was one of my trickiest bottles. Like the other ones, the ship usually fits down the neck of the bottle, so I'm not really dealing with the whole side, that trickery side of it, of putting on the mast and everything usually. But this piece I had to. It was even trickier than a lot of ships and bottles because I had to put the masts on, and then I had to get the ice in there, which is paraffin wax. So what I did, I drilled a little hole in the top of the bottle, and I had like a little brass wire attached to one of the masts. I put the mast together, and then I had the wire coming in the hole, and then I pulled the boat up so it's hanging. Then I poured in boiling water into the bottle, and then molten paraffin wax, and then I lowered the ship into the wax, wait for it to cool, and then actually I was going to leave the water in there, but then the wax shrank, and then the water was steaming up the top half of the bottle, creating condensation. So it'll just tip the water out. It's fine. It doesn't make any difference. This is a future disaster that hasn't happened yet. So this one, you just see a little bubble at the top. And to prevent algae growth, I use distilled water in some of them if I don't want that to happen. So I did Noah's Ark, and it's like a little ark, and then a landscape kind of submerged. And Pearl Harbor was another one. This was, so there was 10 of them altogether. This was kind of the last in the series. It wasn't really part of that series, but it kind of went along with them. I decided I wanted to do a moving piece, a kinetic piece. So I used one of those big winemaking bottles. I made a little ship that sat in it, and white silica sand in the bottom. And I made this cabinet, and it has a motor in it. And I've shown this 2 different ways. One is just on a timer. So the bottle starts spinning, and it spins for about 25 seconds, and the water starts swirling, and the poor little ship gets spun around, and then it stops. And it's kind of really nice when it stops because the water and the sand keep swirling. So the sand looks like clouds, and the ship kind of spins, and then slowly it kind of dies down. And just as everything kind of comes to a rest, the whole cycle starts over again. And the other way I've shown it is with a push button, so it can be controlled by the viewer. I think I like the timer version better, just because I have more control of the whole sequence. I showed this at a show called Museopathy at a marine museum in Kingston. And it was funny, I got a call there about talking about control and issues of control and nature and those kind of ideas. They called me and said that a spider had been building a web in the mast of the ship, and they wanted to know whether they should clean it off or not. I said no. It's like he's making rigging for me. It's perfect. And it's like a little sailor on the ship. Poor guy, probably died of scurvy, I imagine. So here's the ship swirling around and being tossed around. So what I liked, one of the things that made this an important piece for me was the introduction of the mechanical. Like I've been using pumps before, but it was always the movement, the kinetic aspect felt very fluid and very organic. And this time there was the introduction of kind of a more of human element of using gears and machines. And so I decided I wanted to explore that more. And I don't think I actually showed, I showed one of these pieces. Yeah, this is one of the more successful pieces in that series. This was called Up the Wall, and it's all these kind of tiny little bits of wire snippings, and it's actually a byproduct from another piece I did where I wired together 10,000 beer caps into a big sheet, and then I made a machine that kind of made it undulate. I was trying to make approximate water, like kind of waves, but it ended up being more like very reptilian, kind of like snake kind of undulations. It was kind of a very laborious piece, and it wasn't very successful. But out of that came this more successful piece, which, when I'm punching holes in 10,000 bottle caps, my mind had lots of time to think about other work. And I came up with this idea, because I kept the wire snippings, because there was so many of them, like it looked like I had enough to do something with. And so I came up with the idea of piling them and then building a mechanism that was kind of hidden behind the wall. It was like little magnets on a belt, and they'd pull bits of wire out of the pile, and they'd travel up in a line up the wall. And they kind of like scritchy scratch. It looked like little insects. And at the top, like I expected them when they get to the top, the belt kind of goes behind, the magnets pull away, but the next magnet comes up. So I expected them to fall off when they hit the top, but they never do. It just gets more populated at the top, which kind of was more interesting in the end. So what I ended up doing was taking half the magnets off the belt, so there's a clearing area. So what happens is the gap with no magnets actually comes up behind them and starts to undercut them. So they start hanging on to one another and then falling back into the pile until it gets right up to the top, and then the last one drops off. And then just at that point, the magnets start coming up, so the whole cycle starts over again. And the other thing I liked, which was kind of unexpected, was the line that they started to make on the wall. It started making this dark drawing mark that got darker and darker as the show went on. Of course, my pile would flatten out towards the end of the day because they hit and bounce, and so the pile would get lower and lower until the magnets couldn't reach them anymore. So the gallery attendant would have to come and sweep them up and put them back in the pile. So that piece is called Up the Wall, and again, it's quite open-ended. It's like insects, but people at the opening would see kind of more wider metaphors. Like someone said, "Oh, it's like the art world. It's all these people fighting for the little piece of the pie at the top." And well, that's my life. I heard that before. This is 2000. The last piece was 1998. This is 2000. This piece is called Dirty Water. And yeah, in 2000 we had a baby, and I'd spend about an hour a day washing dishes in the sink. And so one night I'm washing dishes, feeling very frustrated, and I started picturing swear words coming up out of the dirty water. So I decided that was what I was going to make. And also, it was kind of appropriate time because it was around the Walkerton where the water contamination issue where people died. So it seemed, and Mike Harris was in the Conservative government, was in power, and they were slashing and cutting everything. So I was in a pretty bad mood anyway. So this seemed to, vent my frustrations. So yeah, so this is part of the first Persona Volare show. And we had a bunch of empty office spaces, and we all got a little office space. So I put my bathtub in the office space. Okay, here we go. So it's this Chlorofoot tub, and I wanted the water to look kind of like really dirty bath water. When I was growing up in England, my mom would make a bath for us, and all 3 kids would have to use the water, and I'd usually be at the end, and that's what the water would look like. So it says shit, fuck, piss. And each one is a different hose. No, it's different little hose, each controlled by a solenoid valve from a compressor, and those 3 little timer controllers that open and close the valves, and they're all kind of working randomly. So the words don't come up in the same sequence. They're all on sort of different time sequences. It's funny, it's subtle because it only comes into focus for a brief moment. And adults don't seem to have a very good attention span because they just, like Gary Michael Dort wrote a review in the Globe and Mail, and he just talked about these beautiful bubbles coming up and making nice patterns. Like, he didn't see the swear words. But my friend's kids came running back and said, "Oh, it's so funny, John." Kids would see it instantly. It's like, this is a piece I talked about, the museopathy show. It was a couple of curators from Montreal who are now in Toronto. Anyway, it was they got together. There was all these different little museums in Kingston, so they get different artists to show in different museums. So they put me in the Marine Museum, which makes sense, and I showed a bunch of my ship-in-the-bottle pieces. And they wanted me to do an installation. This was the dry dock outside the museum where they used to work on repairing ships. And so they wanted me to do it. It's kind of separated from the lake. So I rented some scuba gear. I made this pipe system, and I installed it. And it was pretty nasty down there. It had like many, many years of sludge and oil at the bottom. And I hadn't scuba dived in like 20 years, so I wasn't quite used to it. And my weight wasn't balanced, or my buoyancy. And so I ended up kind of in the sludge, and I stirred up all this black, nasty-looking sludge. So it was pretty scary. So, but anyway, it's very fitting with the piece. It's SOS. It's kind of like this, giving a voice to the water. It's kind of crying for help. But again, it's open-ended. Like, people would read it as, someone stuck down there as a submarine or something. People are calling for help. This piece, I've shown it twice in Kingston, and I showed it in Stratford. This is how I kind of originally envisioned it, like on an old bridge looking right down into like a muddy river. And so in Stratford, I got to show it in that situation. But this piece has a curse, I think, because both times I've shown it, someone is drowned in close proximity to it. One Saturday, they came in to open the museum, and around noon, a body bobbed up. Some guy had slipped and fallen in and drowned the night before. And then in Stratford, a guy on a bike, he just around the bend in the river, it wasn't right by my piece, but it was pretty close, had flipped off his bike and hit his head and drowned in the river. So I don't know, I should probably retire this piece, I think. I'm not very superstitious, but it's kind of a 2 for 2. So with these works, I'd done some other mechanical pieces, and I started getting a bit frustrated. I got way too ambitious, and I didn't show it here, but I got way too ambitious in one piece, and I never quite finished it. So I kind of defaulted back to working with water again. So that's when I did the bubble pieces. And then I started wanting to do some floating, sinking pieces, and I already had I used the same mechanical system for the bubble pieces as for these. So it's a compressor, and solenoid valves controlled by timers that open and close the valves. So this is called Drowning House, and I showed this in Durham, which is on the Sorgeen River. It's kind of, I think it's upstream from Walkerton on the same river system. And this was right close to a dam, which also served as a bridge, so people from the village could walk across the dam to get to the swimming hole on the other side, the swimming beach. And so you could sit down, you could stand on the dam and look down on the house, and it would very, very slowly sink, and it'd take about, it's kind of very slow, because it's just passively air leaking out of a valve. So it took about 4 minutes for it to sink, and then it would spend a couple of minutes on the bottom of the river, and then all of a sudden it would refloat itself and it would be really fast coming up, because the compressor all the compressed air would rush into the inner tubes that are in a box underneath and fill up, and it would pop up. I have a little video of that. There it is, kind of sinking. And the river, it's funny, at first it would disappear from view at the beginning of the summer. It was up for about 3 months or 2.5 months. But there was a very hot summer, so a lot of the water evaporated. So by the end of the summer, you could still see it because it wasn't as deep. And you can see there's the dam. There's always lots of people standing around. I had to go and do some repairs because I got leaks in my inner tubes. It was a bit of a hassle. So it's like a large dollhouse. It's about that big. And I had a light in it for a while. So it was kind of nice at night because you could see it glowing underneath the water. But my electrical connection kept coming loose and shorting out. And with these pieces, it's impossible to test them prior to arriving on site. So all of a sudden, you have all this troubleshooting to do. And often problems don't reveal themselves until the piece has been running for a while, like a week or two. And then all of a sudden, any kind of flaw in the system reveals itself, and you end up fixing it, having to fix it. So this is the same idea. It's within a kind of black box. It was about 6 feet long, kind of coffin size, but a bit deeper. And it's full of water. And I made this copper tanker, and it's got inner tubes inside. And so it's like a larger version of my little tanker ship in the bottle, basically, but this one's kinetic. And it slowly sinks. And I have a video of that too. So again, this was another Persona Volare show, and it was again an office space in Toronto. Persona Volare, it's great showing with them, but it's not quite as doesn't hold together quite as well as the Nethermind shows. They were very atmospheric. A lot of the work related in more closely than with Persona Volare. We're very a diverse group of artists, but it's still fun. There's often connections between the works. So again, when it's sinking, it's very slow, but right at the end, when it starts to go, it really goes. So I think it's pretty much like how a real ship sinks, unless it has a huge hole in it. And then it would spend a couple minutes on the bottom and then pop back up. And it was kind of amazing because I don't have the video of it be floating, but it does everything in reverse. And it follows the same pathway every time, which is kind of amazing that it does that. But it's kind of it created problems too, because it would hit the side of the liner in exactly the same spot every time. It was starting to rub through the liner. And it would hit the bottom in exactly the same spot. So by the end of the show, there was actually a small hole starting to form because it kept punching the same spot. So I haven't shown it again since then, but I want to. I'm pretty happy with that piece. So I'd like to show it again, but it needs some modifications. Also, the oil on top was starting to eat away at the rubber. So there's all these things. I need a layer of oil-resistant rubber around the top to stop the oil eating away. Maybe plexi, maybe covered with rubber at the bottom to protect the bottom. So again, like I said before, you never find out these things till it runs for a while. This piece is called Cold War, and it's 2003. And this is for a kind of site-specific sculpture project at Cambridge Libraries and Galleries in Cambridge, Ontario. And I had to do a piece that would be up for a year, and I choose a site inside the building. It could be outside, and then make a site-specific work. And so the architect was Moriyama, and he likes having water features in his buildings. So he had these kind of pools inside, and then outside there would be another pool that kind of was reflected by the window. But of course, it's a gallery and a library, so humidity was a big issue. So what they did was they just filled these recesses up with rocks from the curling rink that had been there previously that they demolished. So they were kind of these weird areas that, where you didn't know what they were. They seemed empty. They seemed like they needed completion. So what I did was I made these small models of a space shuttle and a Russian Typhoon submarine, and they're hooked up to compressors, they're refrigeration compressors that are hidden underneath the rocks. And they are on timers. So every morning they turn on, and the humidity in the air would condense on the surface, so they'd slowly cover with ice. Actually, in the summer, when it's more humid, the ice would get thicker and form more quickly. In the winter, they just have a thin layer because it's a lot drier. So it's American Space Shuttle. And this is Russian Typhoon-class nuclear submarine. So, so they're both on opposite sides of the building. So I kind of saw it as kind of being opposites but the same. Like one goes up, one goes down. One's a submarine. One's Russian, one's U.S. But they both have kind of military capabilities. They both, I'm sure, well, this one definitely has a lot of radioactive stuff inside, and I think the space shuttle did have some dangerous materials in it too. But it's like being projected into the future when this is all that's left, or there's been an ice age, and humanity is no longer here, but here's this like deteriorating nuclear submarine that's still kind of radiating radiation. And I guess the ice it kind of referenced kind of a harshness in a way of climate, but it also became kind of like this scabbing over. It's kind of like sealing up this dangerous object. So this kind of natural force that is there kind of trying to neutralize these things. But I kind of saw the ice as having more of a kind of a poetic, almost poetic function in these works. I still have kind of a hard time explaining it, but that's okay. You don't need to always fully explain art away. This is a piece I started in 2005. It's called Smoking City. And it's kind of, I've shown this quite a few times. And the first time I showed it was in Paris at the Canadian Cultural Center. And it was a Persona Volare show again. We've been invited to go and do installations and exhibits throughout the building. So they had galleries, but they also had this amazing stairwell, spiral staircase. So I went, and I hadn't visited the site previously, so I didn't really know where I was going to be in the building. But I had an idea for a piece, and the idea actually came from I was at the Active Surplus in downtown Toronto. It's like a surplus store, and they had these cheap fog machines for like $40, and I go, wow, I'm going to play with that and see what I can do. And I just bought a new table saw, so I had like all the styrofoam packaging from it, and so I turned on my fog machine, and I go, oh, wouldn't it be cool if the smoke comes out of the styrofoam? And it looked like the AGO was on fire. That's what it suggested to me, and I kind of liked that idea. But then I started thinking, well, cardboard. No, I could make anything I wanted out of cardboard. So then I started playing with cardboard, making buildings, and then they turned into skyscrapers. And then next thing you know, yeah, it's like smoking buildings, and it kind of resonated. It was obviously after 9/11, so it referenced that. But it's also, the effect was nice. It was not just disaster, because as the smoke builds and dissipates, it changes and it becomes smog. Or in Paris, it read as like kind of this romantic fog. Anyway, in Paris, what I ended up doing, I went there with all these buildings and a fog machine, and I decided I wanted it right at the top of this 4-story spiral staircase, and I cantilevered a shelf. I actually had the technicians build it for me on the opposite side of the railing, so it's like jutting out over this big open space, and the buildings went right to the edge, so very precarious. And then they smoke and swirl around, and it was very romantic there. And the French people working there thought it was really beautiful because they don't have many skyscrapers over there, so it was kind of exotic for them. On the skyscrapers, there's kind of portraits of kind of some iconic towers, like there's the Empire State Building had to be in there, the Chrysler Building, John Hancock's Tower from Chicago, Sears Tower from Chicago. There's the Trans-American Pyramid from San Francisco. Toronto City Hall's in there. The smallest one is the Guggenheim. I couldn't resist doing the Guggenheim. It's tucked in there somewhere. And so the shelf is hollow, and there's holes drilled in the top, and the buildings just sit on the holes. And the smoke machine, it comes with a kind of built-in remote, and you can adjust the time, the length of the spurts of smoke, and the length of time between, so it's very adjustable. And so it turns on about every 4 minutes, and then there's a little fan that helps pump the smoke through, and it leaks out the buildings. And it kind of builds. First, it's really intense, and it does look like 9/11. It would suggest that. And then it dissipates. It also behaves very differently in different places. It depends on the temperature and air currents. There's a picture. That's kind of at its most intense there. That's when it starts to kind of dissipate. So it could be smog. It could be a smog alert day. Okay, I have a video. It's actually Smoking City. I think I waffled on the title for a while. I was like, now it's set on the video. Yeah, I'm still not 100% about the title. I think, well, maybe it should be called The Big Smoke, but then it sounds, I don't know. But I used the cardboard, the corrugations in the cardboard. It kind of suggested the floors of the building, and it's like very, very direct. That's what I kind of enjoyed about this piece, because I'd been working on that refrigeration piece. It was so technical, expensive too. I ended up working with a refrigeration consultant. I'd call him up, and he kind of talked me through the whole process, and he'd sell me the materials. Copper is not cheap, and it's all silver brazing. So the brazing rods, it's like 5 or 10% silver, like $5 each, and they melt away. And I had no money at the time, but then I had this deadline, and I was freaking out, and I ended up spending $7,000 on my credit line. It's like So after that, I switched to cardboard, nice and cheap, and you just need a glue gun and a knife. You can raid recycling bins. Here it is shown, like I've shown it in lots of different locations. This was last year. I had an opportunity to show in an old mill in Clarington, which is like an hour and a half, in Bowmanville, 45 minutes east of Toronto. And it's on the 3rd floor of this old mill, and it's like this beautiful old beamwork up there. And at one end, there was this kind of like this plastered wall, and it looked like a fresco of clouds and smoke. And there's light, there's 2 windows on each side, so the light was perfect. So I kind of put it up there. It was kind of like above an altarpiece in a church or something. It had this kind of church-like atmosphere. It's like this kind of celestial city, and here it read more like cloud or heavenly light, and it was a lot more positive. So while I was working on the cardboard, I kind of wanted to do some portraits of buildings that didn't work in my city. So the CN Tower didn't really fit. It's too Canadian, for one thing, and it's too specific, too recognizable. It's kind of pretty eccentric structure, but I still wanted to do it. So I did a little CN Tower, and I was telling student Emily today. She's going to have to listen to this story again, but I'd done a bunch of these models of buildings. I did the Empire State Building, and I did actually the World Trade Center too. I didn't want to put that in the Smoking City because it was too loaded for one thing, and it made it too specifically about 9/11, and I wanted to make the piece more open than that. But I made these little tiny buildings, but they were like models. They didn't feel like they were art. And then we had our couch reupholstered, and it's a Danish modern couch, and the upholsterer, he just didn't get the Danish modern thing, and he overstuffed the cushions, so they're all bulgy and not sleek and flat. And so I pulled a layer of stuffing out, and I'm pulling it out, and it's like, oh wow, this is just like smoke and cloud. And so I filled up a bag, and I went to the studio, and I started sticking them on my buildings, and all of a sudden they were transformed from models into kind of small artworks, and they kind of came alive as soon as I did that. Kind of gives it a sense of scale and movement and life that they didn't have before. Here's the Golden Gate Bridge. We lived in San Francisco. My partner did her master's there for 2 years, so I spent about a year in total there. But the Golden Gate Bridge was amazing when the fog rolls in late afternoon. It's like it is like a blanket of, it looks like a physical solid substance coming in. So it replicates that. It goes in a corner, obviously. So again, these were kind of lighter, smaller, more immediate works. It's kind of nice to switch from these big projects like Smoking City. I worked on that over a period of 3 years. I kept adding buildings. It's just nice to do something a little bit more immediate. Give yourself a break. This was called Electra. It's a model of that I made of the Lockheed Electra, which was the plane that Amelia Earhart flew around the world, disappeared in. It's also in Casablanca. It's very kind of this kind of iconic, romantic airliner. It's like one of the first passenger planes. That's the word I'm looking for. So here again, I had the fluff. And this was actually a maquette from a proposal I did for an airport. It was going to be all done in mesh, so it would be a transparent kind of plane floating inside the airport, but it was rejected. Anyway, I had this nice wooden maquette I made, so I stuck it on the wall and then put the upholstery stuffing on it, and then it's this crashing plane. There's a Spitfire, did the same thing. So it's like very dramatic, and the shadows are like brilliant. You know, you get slash across the wall. So I did a bunch of those kind of works. The series is called Smoking Cloud, and I showed it at Archive Gallery along with my Smoking City piece. So it was kind of a nice space. It was on the 3rd floor of a building. You had to go up the stairwell. And so I do pieces all the way up, and it kind of, at the climax would be my Smoking City at the top, smoking away. Okay, while doing these kind of miniature works, actually, I want to say one more thing about the miniature works that's important, which I kind of missed. And that is that I found with working with miniature, a way of kind of compressing, you could say a lot with miniatures. You're kind of condensing the world, and so you can talk about kind of big global issues in a manageable way. Like the ships and the bottles, like it's a whole world in there, and there's, it's issues about the environment and whatever. And you can do that by, working with on the miniature scale. But while I was doing that, I was also doing kind of more site-specific installation pieces. This is a piece I did at the Tree Museum, which is in Gravenhurst, north of Toronto. There's 200 acres there, and they invite 3 or 4 artists each year to come and do site-specific works. And some are permanent, some aren't permanent. Like some last as long as they're going to last. It's harsh environment. It's it's just out in the woods. They usually don't bring it in the winter. Some pieces they do for a couple of years, and then they get tired of taking it apart and moving it in, so they give up. But I'd been working up there. I helped other artists install. I've been working there, helping do maintenance, and helping artists install their work. So I kind of saw what I felt was more successful and least successful work. So I wanted to do something that really felt like it grew out of the place and just use materials on site. So I went up and found like a hollow and in the ground and kind of excavated the rock to kind of give myself a head start, so I'm not digging a big hole or having to build a higher structure. And then I kind of collected all these mainly dead trees. I did cut down some saplings to create an internal structure, so you could actually go inside this piece. It's called Lodge. So I wanted to make it look something that looked really natural, but then you go inside and it looks more man-made, so there's that tension between the man-made and the natural. So inside, all these kind of all this vaulting kind of came together in on the central rock and kind of created this central column, which I wove rope into, so it became like the base of this very ornate column. But it's all natural, it's all woven, and light would come in. And the way when I was excavating the rock, it was on this big piece of granite rock on the Canadian Shield. The way, I don't know what formed it, but it was pretty amazing. It kind of created this kind of crude spiral, and there was these kind of, it's almost like the rock was, it's like a big bubble that had formed when the earth was cooling. That's what it looked like. So this was a pure process piece. I had a really rough idea of what I was going to do, and I just let it evolve through the making process. And it took me 19 days to make it. It's pretty big in there, and unfortunately, this was 2005, and I think it started to collapse like last year. And I did jack up the back and try and get I got another year out of it, but I think last summer was very wet, or perhaps it was the summer before, and it kind of accelerated the whole rotting process, and so it's collapsing. So it's done. But so 5 years. There it is in winter. It was nice in winter. So this started a series of kind of installations that kind of investigated, kind of a relationship between the architecture and nature, and kind of finding different balances between the two things. This is a 1 gig collective project Hick Collective. It was kind of organized by Gordon Hatt, who was a curator at Cambridge and then at Rodman Hall in St. Catharines. He'd been a student at U of T, and he wanted to do a series of installations within Hart House, which is the U of T Student Center. And it's this neo-Gothic, kind of over-the-top architecture. And so I went there, and I kind of went in. It's too much inside. It didn't seem to me any room for art inside the building. There's all this innate woodwork and everything, and it's such a strong atmosphere. So I kind of went into this little kind of vestibule and entryway. There was kind of neutral space, except it was arched. It has like kind of two blind arches on either side. And I decided that was the space I wanted to use. And one of the things I liked, it was kind of halfway between inside and outside. So it's this kind of transition space. And I sat there with a sketchbook, and then it kind of just, came to me, let's fill in both sides with mirror and let them reflect each other. And then I put these dead trees in there, so I kind of created this never-ending interior forest. And the whole, the atmosphere really worked with the whole kind of fairy tale atmosphere of the building as well. Made people think of, Harry Potter and Hogwarts and all that. And I'm not sure I like that. It's more like Lion Witch in the Wardrobe. That's who I grew up. And it stayed up. I went to take it down, and Barbara Fisher, the curator, said, "No, keep it up, keep it up. We like it." And then they took it down without even asking me. I don't know what they did with the mirror. It's like $600 worth of mirror there. I guess. Then I was invited to do another piece in, this is called Nature in the Garage. And it was a show organized by Janet Bellotto, and she got all these vinyl, like Rona vinyl garden sheds donated, and it was across various locations across Toronto, and I forget how many artists, like 12 artists. And so you get this little vinyl shed, and you get to do whatever you want in it. So my idea is kind of an extension of the Hart House piece. Oh, that piece was called Smoke and Mirrors, by the way, because while I was installing, I realized it was a smoking area. People would come out and start smoking cigarettes. So I go, oh, that's the title of the piece. So I wanted to do kind of an extension of that idea, kind of creating kind of a magical kind of space within this kind of set piece of architecture. So what I did was I got all these tree limbs, actually from Rodman Hall. They wouldn't let me take them from the parks in Toronto because they just let them rot. There, it kind of sustains the habitat for animals and things. So this is looking in there, and you see all this trees and stuff in there, and it's like this wild forest. And then what I did was I built the shed over a hollow. So when you go in, you actually step down and go down a path inside. So it kind of opens up and feels a lot bigger on the inside than it looked from the outside. And I kind of jammed as much stuff in there as I could, so it kind of obscures the perimeters of the shed. And then I tucked little bits of mirror in here and there, like very discreetly, so you get little glimpses that seem to go on a lot further than you can see, a lot further than the walls of the shed. So it kind of had this feeling of vastness in there and wildness as well. And I left a couple of the ceiling, I think one ceiling panel off, so you get natural light in there, and when it rained, the rain would come in. This is called diorama. And when you look back, look at the door. And so I was talking about Lion Witch of the Wardrobe. It's kind of like being in the wardrobe, or coming back, being in the forest and then coming up to the door of the wardrobe. So this piece, this was at Persona Volare was invited to the Tree Museum to do a series of temporary sculptures and installations. So they had this really nice old dilapidated outhouse there, and I thought, my idea, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to clad it in mirror. And then we went to move it, and it was like really big and heavy, and there was a bird nest with eggs in there, so I just decided I'd build my own outhouse and clad it with mirror. So it's kind of flipping, the last piece inside out, basically, putting the mirrors on the outside and the architecture on the inside, and basically it's like a cloaked outhouse, basically. It just disappears. And Lisa Neighbor, she was one of the other artists in the group. She had her eye on the outhouse too, but she wanted to do something on the inside, which I actually, unfortunately don't have pictures of. I should get them. But she put these little solar cells on the roof, and then on the inside she had all these little glowing fruit plastic fruit that would kind of glow. So you go and sit on the bench and you'd have these little magical fruit hanging above you. So when I took it apart and removed it from the tree museum, and they actually missed it, and they actually ended up buying it. They got a discount rate, but it's there permanently now, and I wrap it up in tarp for the winters, just so the moisture and ice won't get behind the glass. And so it's in the process of its second winter. I hope it survives, because it's a lot colder this year than it was last year. You can always buy a new mirror, I guess. This is a piece I did in a vitrine down at Harbourfront, York Quay Centre in Toronto. They have all these little vitrines. So I made this little green landscape. And using the same technology for the sinking, floating things, I rigged up a little system so that puffs of talcum powder blow in there. And so it starts off, at the beginning of the opening, it's all green. And then by the end, it looks like it's, at the end of the opening, it looked like it had a heavy frost. By the end of the show, it was like avalanches and things happening. It's totally buried. I had to go in every week and load up my little reservoir with talcum powder. And I must have spent about $30 on talcum powder. It's not cheap. That was like perfect for that, but I couldn't really show it. I need a really contained kind of thing like a vitrine, because you don't want this people inhaling talc. It's not good for you. So then I decided I wanted to do another snowing piece, and I didn't know what I wanted it to snow on. And then I went to a show at the power plant, and they were showing Italian artist. It doesn't matter what his name is because I forgot it, but they were showing a documentary on Marlene Dietrich by Maximilian Schell. And there's just one sequence in that. It's all. She didn't want herself to be filmed, so it's just her voice and being interviewed by Maximilian Schell. And then they've got all this archival footage from her performances, and she's talking about the war. There's some archival film footage from the war. And there's one scene where it's a plane flying over like Hamburg or someplace after it's been firebombed, and it's just all these empty shells, and all the buildings are white, and they have the black openings, and it's just really kind of spooky, kind of beautiful, but spooky and horrifying. And I went back to that show a couple of times just to see that little clip of the movie. And then it suddenly clicked. That's what I want. That kind of scene is what I wanted it to snow on. So I started making these little buildings out of wood, and then I'd torch them, and then controlled torching. I'd burn them, make them burn for a while, and throw a damp cloth on them. And then I started gluing them down to a landscape, and then it happened in stages. Like often, I don't have a clear idea fully of what I'm going to do at the end, but I started putting together the buildings and going like, how am I going to contain this? And then they brought in the mirrors to kind of stop it, but also expand it. And I decided I wanted them in kind of an old box, so it's kind of like a crate, and it's like an old box you might find up in your attic, and you've stored away, and you've opened it up, and then all of a sudden, there's this kind of forgotten horror in there. And puffs of snow like blow up from the center. So again, at the beginning of a show, it kind of starts off pretty black, and it starts snowing, and the snow gets deeper as the show progresses. And, with this one, it took me a long time to figure out what the snow should be. I didn't want to use talc because it's in the same space as the viewer, and it kind of blows up kind of right close to your face too. And so I ended up a lot of trial and error, and ended up coming up with garlic skins, white garlic skins and onion skins. And so I started loitering around supermarkets around the garlic section and filling up bags. At first I started just collecting it for home and cooking, but after a whole summer after I ground it, I had like a pathetic amount, like not even an eighth of a cup. So I decided I had to get more drastic about my collection. So I go hang around supermarkets, and no one noticed me. It was kind of amazing. No one challenged me. No one made me pay for the garlic skins. I felt too embarrassed. I would have paid for them. They were like really cheap because they're light, but I was kind of embarrassed. And here's a detail, and it reflected. And it just kind of goes on forever. It's kind of like this magic box. And it kind of looks kind of liquidy when you look down on it. I'm always kind of startled when I haven't seen it in a while. I take the lid off, and I get this kind of feeling vertigo for a second. This is a piece, and I think it was the last Persona Volare show we did, and it was 2009 at Tom Thompson Gallery in Owen Sound. And Persona Volare had been invited there to come and pick pieces from their permanent collection and do an artwork that kind of responds to that. And it's mainly painting and two-dimensional work there. So I went there and I'm looking around going, not feeling very inspired, no ideas. And then I wandered into a little gallery that was filled with Tom Thompson stuff. And like the only three-dimensional, one of the few three-dimensional objects they had was an old palette of his. And it was covered in blobs of paint, and it kind of warped. And it was in a vitrine. And I kind of looked down low, and it kind of looked like a landscape to me. So that kind of went click, okay. Maybe I can track a video camera past it, and it become kind of transformed into a landscape. So I said I'd like to use that object, and they gave me permission. And I went away, and I started thinking about it, and thinking, well, not much of an idea. It's kind of boring, just this one landscape. And then I thought, well, maybe I could use a bunch of objects from the gallery, from the collection. Like there's an old baby cup and some photographs and like one of his paintings maybe. And they had this weird little chunk of wood that someone had brought in and said it was from his studio, and it had like the old square nails banged into it, like and a piece of ticker tape on it. It's kind of this weird thing. So I came up with the idea that I do this kind of faux documentary just using these objects and track the video camera past them. And I arranged them so it kind of went from light to dark. And also I stole my daughter. I decided I wanted a soundtrack for it, so I stole my daughter's little music box. Plays Row, Row, Row Your Boat, which seemed kind of fitting. So the mechanism drives the camera across, but also plays the music box. And so what I did was, there's a kind of contemporary gallery around the corner where the Persona Volare was. So I put the case with all the mechanism and the stuff in there. And then around the corner in the Tom Thompson gallery, along with the historical stuff, I put the TV where you actually encounter the video. So it's live feeding, right? So you see what's actually happening in the case on the TV, and you're not aware of that when you first encounter it. So here's a documentation of it. So that's a photograph of Tom Thompson on Lake Scugog. And that's his baby cup. It's got like a picture of a heron on it, etched in. And then you start going across this kind of weird landscape, which is his palette. So I don't show the whole thing. Then towards the end, like the piece of wood with the nail stuck in it, starts to look like it's underwater, like the bottom of a lake. And then you end up with this really dark painting of Smoke Lake in Algonquin Park. It's not the lake he died on, but it's Smoke Lake. But it's, I'm kind of referencing his death in that kind of way. So it's funny, the preparators had to come in with the white gloves and put everything in the case for me. That painting was worth $500,000, and it's right beside my little motor that's chugging away. I was worried it's going to burst. It's the first time I'd shown it. I was worried it's going to burst into flames and set the painting on fire. But it didn't. It worked out fine. And yeah, the title, like I couldn't alter the photograph, but I wrote on the glass, so the light coming in throws the shadow onto the photograph of the title. So it was kind of fun doing those little tricky things. So at the end of the show, I think the curator said, well, they wanted their objects back. They wouldn't let me keep them for some reason. So they asked me what I was going to do with the case and mechanism. And I said, well, kind of jokingly, I said, oh, maybe I'll do a remake of Apocalypse Now. And then I started thinking about it, going, wow, that's a good idea. So that's what I did. So yeah, this is called Redux. And it's, I reread Heart of Darkness, and then I watched Apocalypse Now a couple of times, and I kind of condensed the key moments in that into my 4.5 minutes. So yeah, here's the jungle is mirror for river. It starts off with a turntable, and there's a helicopter that comes around and knocks the needle over. It's playing The Doors' The End, and so that supplies the soundtrack in real time. And here it is. Here's the first part. I'm not going to show the whole thing because it's kind of long. So that's a little video camera. It's a little spy camera. So I play with things like the focus on the camera is, if things are up close, it gets all nice and fuzzy and beautiful. So it's going through the jungle here. These are all plastic plants from a dollar store that I used to make the jungle. So this part was kind of inspired by a Thin Red Line. I don't know if you've seen that, but this beautiful shots are going through the jungle, and it's all beautiful. And then they find some guy with his legs blown off. It's like, so that kind of contrast. So this is at the end. So it goes through the river and then through fog, which is kind of a transition point. And this is the horror. This is like Marlon Brando here. Which is a mummified dead cat my neighbors found under their porch. Like I'm working on the piece and I'm going like, what is the horror going to be? And then my neighbor goes, "Come here, John, look at this." And I said, "Cool." And we put it back in the garbage, and I walked out in the backyard and I said, "Wait a minute, I need that." But unfortunately, the cat died the wrong way around, which is very inconsiderate of him. Like, it would have been better for him to die with his head on this side. On this side. So I wanted the camera to encounter his body first, and then his head at the end. But he died the wrong way around, so I had to make that whole little turntable system so that he kind of spins around. So that cat really stank. Like, it wasn't too bad considering he was dead, but so I stuck him in well, actually, first I put him in a gardening bag and shoved him under the back porch, but then some animal went and pooped on him. So it was getting close to my show, and I showed this in LA first time, so that was what I was aiming towards. So I retrieved him and cleaned him off. It was actually a her. It was a feral cat I'd seen in the neighborhood, and I hadn't seen it in a while, so I figured that was the cat it was. And I stuck it in a big garbage can filled with salt to try and kind of leach any moisture out of it. And it smells a bit better now. I wanted to we moved. This is a piece I wasn't going to show you, but I'm going to show you for another reason. I was in a show down at Harbourfront, York Quay Gallery, and it was artists using retired Science Center exhibits. And it was great. Like, the curator had negotiated with the Science Center. They had a huge warehouse of things they no longer showed, but they didn't want to throw them in the garbage. So they're just sitting there rotting away. This was in a tractor trailer, unheated, in a parking lot, and it was just disintegrating. Like, all the trees are getting dried out. It was all crunchy. This is part of a big train set diorama they used to have. It's Rogers Pass and the Rockies, the spiral tunnels, and any train set enthusiast knows about it, and a lot of people in Toronto remember it from growing up. But this is the smallest fragment of it. It's the only one that would, I could actually fit into my studio. The one I wanted had like a big valley and two chunks of mountain, but it was like 5 meters long by 4 meters wide. So this one is like, 8 feet, almost 2 meters by 2 meters by 4 feet wide. I'm flipping back between metric and imperial. But when we moved, I moved into a smaller studio. What I did was I epoxied the river, got the river flowing. I spent most of the time restoring it and replacing trees and things. And I kind of left a lot of the dead trees, so it's kind of like nature after mankind has disappeared, and it's regenerating and coming back to life. But it was kind of I don't know, I was never very happy with the work. It was kind of, my alterations were very subtle. I was treating the object as being too precious, and I wasn't really transforming it enough. So anyway, when we went to move, like I was perplexed of what to do with this piece. People said, "Oh, you could donate it, but that takes a long time." I didn't want to throw it out. I had no room to store it. So the only way I could justify keeping it was if I cut it up and reused it in a new piece. And so I wanted to do another live feed video piece. So I decided to use the mountain for that. And so I started, thinking about movies with mountains in them and stuff, and I ended up settling on Nosferatu. The journey through the mountains up to Nosferatu's castle, because the back of the model is pretty nice too. Like, it became like the interior of a rotting castle. There's all this structure and chunks of nice foam, and it's really dirty in there too. So it's and spider webs, and it suggested the interior of Nosferatu's castle, Count Dracula. So yeah, I made it this time. Like, I didn't want to do a linear thing. I wanted to do a cyclical thing, so it doesn't have to backtrack. For Redux, it kind of worked because in the story they go up the river, they get Kurtz, and then they go back down the river. So it's okay working in reverse, but I wanted to do something that just really had no ending. So I built a circular table, and the camera's fixed. So the scenes move around the camera. And this time you didn't see it on TV, I had it projected. This is my show in Buffalo. So there's the table rotating. And you can see the camera kind of in the center there. And here's a video of it. So I use my mirror again as kind of edit points. So it kind of wipes the screen. So there's a little toy accordion that's being played by the mechanism that's supplying the sound. I kind of want to roughly, like I looked at the original Nosferatu, the 1922 version, and I looked at the Herzog version. So it's kind of more like the Herzog, but they're very kind of close in the sequence and the plot and everything. But I wanted to approximate kind of the music in the Herzog version. It's kind of, it's one creepy bit where it's kind of just voices kind of singing, and it's very simple, like a couple of notes. So I chose the harmonica because you can get more than one. You can get chords and two notes, one on the outtake and one on the intake. This is inside of the castle. So it doesn't follow Nosferatu exactly. It just kind of takes elements of it. Like Herzog's Nosferatu starts out with all these mummified kind of bodies standing up with it. It's pretty, wearing shoes and holding purses and things. It's like really creepy. So that's kind of an approximation of that. So this is where the title, this is Nosferatu here. And he just comes on for a little bit. He's actually cut out of a beer can, and he's hidden around the corner, and then there's a little dollhouse light that just turns on and that's the camera there. It's a little. Okay, so that's it for that work. I just want to show you this. This is a public commission I did. It's a bit different, but so this is completed in 2009 along the railway tracks it's a multi-use pathway the city put in, and it's 2.5 kilometers long, and so I've kind of won the commission to do these pieces, and so I wanted to do 4 objects that kind of reference the industrial architecture that was right there. It was kind of an interesting site because it was kind of wild, around railway tracks, a lot of graffiti, a lot of kind of vagrants using it for drinking and bonfires and things. And so I had this really wild atmosphere. And then it was all very industrial as well. So I made these. This object was inspired by the scrap heap at Solway Metal. There was all these chimneys and factories. So this is expanded mesh. They're very big. They're like 6 meters tall, and they're very long and thin. So that when you're going along the pathway, you can't really make out the forms until you get right up beside them. There's also GO trains go past them, so I wanted them big enough that you'd see them from the GO trains and at regular intervals. So I haven't seen them from the GO train yet. I've been kind of too busy, but I want to see if it kind of creates kind of an animation or a very kind of crude animation. That was the idea. They flicker a lot because of the meringue between the different layers of mesh. And they're very kind of rough and ready, kind of withstand vandalism. And they have been graffitied, but it doesn't destroy them because it's the mesh and it kind of dissipates the graffiti. I'd also envisioned plants growing up through them too, so they become kind of enmeshed in the environment. This one was kind of more of a landscape. I kind of wanted to go between, back and forth between landscape and architecture. So it's going back to more of my themes of my installation works. And this one was outside Nestle's chocolate factory, and there's all these pairs of windows that kind of look like eyes, so I put windows in mine. Yeah, that's a hard one because it's kind of specific to whatever space you're kind of working with. What I often do if I'm doing a site-specific work, I go and hang out there and see if anything kind of jumps out at me. So it's kind of becoming sensitive to the space and then kind of accentuating what atmosphere is there already, rather than trying to create something on top of that, which becomes more kind of theatrical and contrived. And so it's better to kind of go with the flow, basically. Which is what I did with materials. I often use materials, let the materials suggest the idea rather than making it do something it doesn't want to do. Like the cardboard was kind of natural for doing the buildings because it has the lines like floors in it already. And actually with that piece, I remember being up at the CN Tower and looking down on Toronto and thinking the buildings looked like cardboard boxes, so that. But yeah, so this piece, I went and hung out and kind of absorbed the atmosphere, and then the architecture, the industrial architecture is what really jumps out in this kind of wild theme, wild kind of feeling. So I wanted to kind of do something that fit in with that, and so very industrial materials like that mesh, the expanded mesh, is pretty harsh. It's like it kind of protects itself. Like people don't really want to climb on it. They're going to cut their fingers and. I kind of want to let it happen naturally because once they take hold, they can get out of control. And so I don't want them to be totally covered. I'm thinking if they got halfway over them, it would be okay. If any more than that, then they'd start to lose, you lose their structure, their sense of structure. But we'll see how it goes in a couple of years. If they haven't established themselves, we might go and throw some morning glory seeds on them or something. Yeah, Virginia creeper would be bad news. We got that growing on our house, and it's like our house is disappearing. But yeah, I'd like to see that. And, you get nice. The other thing is you get nice shadows happening with this movement of the sun, and the wind whistling through them too. So I kind of like to set up situations where there's as much interaction with its environment as possible. Which is why galleries are showing work in galleries is often a little bit disappointing because things kind of lose a lot of their the relationship with their environment because there is no real environment there. It's just kind of more blank, neutral, white walls, and that's good for some works. I mean, I make work for both situations, but some of the Nethermind pieces. I've shown them in gallery spaces, and they're totally different. They become, you start looking at them more as formal art objects, and they lose a lot of their power. And so you kind of end up having to do, paint the walls black so that they don't stick out as discrete objects, and trying to make it more like the warehouse space, basically. It's a lot of work to do that, and it feels like you're maybe cheating as well. the Cold War piece too. Like I haven't shown that piece since then because I kind of need the rocks to cover up the compressors, and it feels kind of wrong. Like I think I've accepted if I get a chance to show it, I will. I'll have to get rocks to cover up and kind of create an installation, like a kind of barren landscape within a project room or something, and then have my my space shuttle and submarine in there. Well, it's kind of hard to say without a specific situation, but yeah, it's a point where the piece is not going to work, right? It's not going to do anything, and like I guess site-specific works always work because they're made for that environment. I guess it's moving into the galleries where, and sometimes you don't know until you actually see it in the site, and then I mean it's just different. I mean it's not as powerful as it was before. It doesn't mean it's bad or anything either. So usually it's still decent. It's not embarrassing or. Yeah, I can't think of a situation where that's happened where I've said no, that's wrong. Oh yeah, no, I mean they have to. Yeah, like material decisions. Like part of the reason I chose the mesh is like I wanted to make big objects for one thing, and so how do you make a really big object? And the budget wasn't huge. Like it wasn't very. Like I didn't make any money on this, but I felt it needed more than one object to kind of activate that space because it was so long and thin. So I chose the mesh because it's a lot of space in it, right? So it's not a lot of material. And it's industrial, it can withstand a lot of abuse. So it took me a while to get, once I chose the material, the whole idea kind of came up quite easily after that, like the kind of forms that I'd work with. But yeah, that's always a consideration is, it has to last a long time. It has to withstand the graffiti and vandalism. Safety is an issue, like climbing. There's a gap at the bottom that the conservator for the city wanted so that you could kind of rake garbage out, but people can't climb in underneath it. Now, unfortunately, me and my fabricator got our wires mixed up, or our communication wasn't going well. This is the first piece he did. And he put a gap there. Like he kind of mixed up the both ideas. Like I wanted either feet going right down and then a gap for the rake. But we changed that and had it just floating a few inches above the ground, and he did that wrong. So actually, kids have gotten in there and have been climbing on the interior. So hopefully no one gets hurt. But it's the city's insurance now. It's not mine, so that's good. It's their responsibility. But so far, kids aren't dumb. It's like I've been climbing in there, and it's hard to fall. But yeah, that's liability and accident safety is a big issue. It's like all these things that have to kind of come together. And unfortunately, these are galvanized steel, so that it's not as permanent as like bronze or stainless. But you should get a number of years out of it. And if rust spots start appearing, the conservator says there's ways of like spot galvanizing it. And even if worst came to worst, you could replace panels as well if they felt that they wanted to spend that much money. And I think the city's pretty committed. Once it works up, they will continue to maintain it. Like there was the big Susan Shell fountain down at the Dome. It lasted a few years and it broke, and they just finished restoring that and spending more than they originally paid for it for the restoration, like millions, restoring, getting it going again. So that gives me hope that this piece will, be maintained for a while. But even if it's not a precious piece, so even if it you get some rust spots, as long as it's kind of stabilized, then it's not going to worry me aesthetically. It can take quite a lot of abuse. Even dents would be fine. It's like they're big enough.